one time, just one more time. I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time. Talking about days gone by. I don't know, but I've been told those days we were walking, they were solid gold. And Lord, we could carry such a heavy load, walking in days gone by. I don't know if people heard me, but I sure heard some people cry. I don't know if we were worthy, but we sure took some people high. Just one thing, just one more thing. I'd sure love to hear those old guitars ring. I sure want to be amongst the ones who sing, talking about days gone by. 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 Tomorrow, I don't even know about today, but I do know that tomorrow, if they asked me, they would hear me say, just one time, just one more time. I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time, talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by. Days gone by. Days gone by. Days gone by. Days gone by.
And as I was sitting there crying, because WB had just fired me, this is 1941, I guess you all remember that, and sitting there crying, and he said, I'll quit, and then they'll have to hire you back, and they did. So I was only fired for, that's why I forgot, I was only fired for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours tops. I went to the Expositor from Brantford Collegiate for no good reason except that I had some pull. And they needed a reporter who wasn't in the Navy, Army, or Air Force, and that I qualified right there. And so I was the second woman reporter and photographer and proofreader on the Expositor that they'd ever had. Ethel Raymond doesn't count. She was the fashion editor, and she typed with gloves on and a hat. None of us thought she counted. But my journalism school was the Brantford Expositor, and I've been doing jokes about it. I did learn. I learned the CP style. The writers here know that, what the CP style used to be. I learned the CP style, which is the backbone of being a journalist, and still is. Was the backbone and still is. And Art Whitaker, the managing editor, was terribly bad-tempered man. Managing editors aren't like that anymore. And he taught me never to start a sentence with the word there is or there are. That offended him. Thought it was grammatically a horror. And I'm now 78 years old. I've been a reporter for 62 years. 62 years. I'm still writing. And I never start a sentence with there is. Great training. So I'm thrilled to be here. The Expositor means a lot to me. It was not just a journalism school. It was my lesson on how to live a life. We were very collaborative. We were proud of ourselves. We loved the paper. We learned to do everything because there were so few of us. It just was an ideal time to be starting a career, and it launched me on a life that has been most of the time pretty good. So, thank you, Expositor. Thank you all.
I'm more than happy to come and say a few words because the Expositor has meant a great deal to me for the past 30 years. 20 years as editor, 10 as a retiree. And my retirement, I keep saying to people, well, that was the best career move I ever made. And some of you may agree with that.
But I can certainly say that it was the best newspaper I ever worked for. And when you see the talent and the skill of the people who are sitting here today and the others who aren't here, and to think that all of that was passed down year after year, generation after generation, and you really appreciate the knowledge and the wisdom that just permeates the building there, and you see it on display as you do today. It's an overwhelming sentiment to see it all.
I'm Sue Johnson. I worked at the Expositor from '78 until '97 as a reporter and an editor and other various roles. And the most interesting story I ever worked on was the whole series of stories about Central School when they were trying to decide whether to keep the old school, tear it down, whatever. Eventually it caught on fire, so they ripped it down, started to build a new one, and started to dig up bones, skeletons, when they got in there. And I remember well the day that Karen George phoned me to say, we're digging up bodies at Central School. Off I went. And it was a very good story, and there were lots of other good stories, but that's the one.
I'm Nancy Andrews, and I was a reporter between 1976 and 1985. One of my most, I guess, the funniest stories that I did that I got teased about was when I covered the cougar on the Six Nations Reserve. And anyway, the story went that people were seeing footprints of this cougar or this big cat all around the reserve, and I would go out with people and they would tell me what they saw, and they show me, you know, prints in the ground and on the tree marks, and you know, I was following this up, and they would tell me things like, I saw it and it jumped like 30 feet high, right? And so I'd print this, and you know what, I would quote them, and of course afterwards people, you know how high 30 feet is? Of course, well, not really, but it's pretty high. So anyway, I got teased a bit about my cougar stories. Yeah.
My name is Craig Cameron, serial number 46321. I worked at the Expositor from '86 to '93. I guess my best memory is at the awards in London. Me and Jim Fleming walked into a room in a drunken stupor, as we did quite a few times, and I recall, I think it was the Sweet Adelines convention in London, and we walked into the room, we had about 50 women sing to us. That's one of my best memories. I think Jim will remember it as well.
My name is Howard Livick. I worked at the Expositor for 35 years. Started off as the Fairchild engraver, transferred over and became photographer for a long time. I remember quite an instance with Jack Bowman, one of our photographers. We wanted a springtime picture, so we went and got some lambs, and we started to toss them in the air, one over the top of the other, while Jack photographed them. It worked out well. He won a prize with it, thanks to us.
I'm Ida Drabble. I worked at the Expositor from 1957 to 1975 when they kicked me out because I was 65. And we had worked on a farm, and the day I started, I was driving tractor for my husband to pull up some posts. And when we came into the house that day, I picked up the Expositor and happened to look at the classified and saw an ad that they wanted somebody in the women's page, I think it was, to rewrite stories or do layout work. And I went in. I said, I think I'll go in and find out about this. So Stan took me in, and Peter Preston interviewed me in there, and he called Thelma Finley, who was the then women's editor, in to meet me. And she gave me a wedding to rewrite. And after that, I was hired right away, and much to my surprise, to ask if I could start the next day. It was supposed to be just for half days at the time, but it soon lengthened into full time. And I did rewrite work and layout work, which I enjoyed mostly very much.
Hi, I'm Allison Lawler, and I worked at the Expositor during the summer of 1999 as a summer intern reporting. And I remember having a great summer. One thing that stands out, I remember it was my first day at the Expositor, and I had bought an old used car, and that first day I went out and my car was parked somewhere, and I realized I had a flat tire, so I had to get Michael to come and change the tire for me, because it was the first car I ever owned. I didn't even know how to change a tire, so that was great.
My name is Ted Beare. I was a sports editor of the Expositor for 2,000 years at least. My favorite memory was when there were just three of us in the newsroom one early morning, maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. And Jim Fleming had just started. This was his first day there, and he didn't know anybody, didn't know what was going on. He was sitting on the far side of the room, and Ron Craig and I were sitting on the other side. And Ron got up to go over to where the waste paper basket was, and he was shredding some paper or something like that and putting it in the waste paper basket. But he was also smoking a cigar. And the ashes went down in, set fire to the paper, and the flames started shooting up. And Ron had been told he should not start any more fires. And so, panicking, he jumped into the waste paper basket with both feet, jumping up and down to try to put out the fire. Well, then he gets sick. So then he barfed into the basket, but his feet were already in there, so he's all over his feet. And I'm just sitting there. I haven't paid no attention. I watched and I'm laughing. I think the tears were coming down my eyes. I was laughing. Poor old Jim Fleming sitting on the other side had never seen or heard of this act before, and he's wondering why I'm not getting up there helping out my buddy. But anyway, that's the best memory I have.
I'm Colleen Cross, and I was a proofreader, part-time proofreader at the Expositor for about 9 months in 1994. And that's where I met Dave Judd, and we ended up getting married about 3 years after that. And I just remember getting a big send-off when I left. We got a cake, and instead of saying goodbye, I said happy birthday. So I guess that late at night, we used to work from 11 o'clock to 4 in the morning, so I guess that's the best I could do. It was nice.
I'm Mo Boyer. I worked there as a district editor, wire editor, and I did sports page layouts. One of my funniest memories, I guess, is about Ron Craig, but I'll tell you a different one. About the poor late Dick Cross. Dick Cross always came in late, about 10 or 15 minutes late every day. And Gord Murray, who was our managing editor at the time, used to be on his back constantly. One day Dick came in at 10 to 8 and announced loud and clear in the newsroom, "Gord, check the clock." Murray, who was sucking on his pipe, looked down, looked at the schedule and said, "Dick, check the schedule, it's your day off."
I'm Vicki White, worked in the newsroom as a reporter from, I think, 1989 to early 93, largely Native Affairs. In fact, I think almost exclusively Native Affairs for the whole time. My favorite story of the whole time was going to Oka with a bunch of people from Six Nations who were taking supplies and food up to the Mohawks up there. So we spent, I think, 16 hours on the floor of a van along with 20 other people and all of their supplies. So that was my favorite story. My favorite memory is of any number of occasions with Peter Fitzpatrick causing trouble, including the ill-fated bet when Fitzpatrick claimed, after a lifetime of debauchery and poor eating habits and physical exercise regime, he decided he was going to reform his life and go on a huge bicycle trip. I don't know where, but of course the newsroom had to taunt him into this, and one of the many incentives to him doing his trip was that for whatever reason I would walk through the mall, the Eaton Square Mall, in tight pink pajamas, which would largely have you meld into anyone else who was in the mall at that time. But so unfortunately Fitzpatrick lived up to his word, did his bike trip, and so I had to wear a t-shirt with his face emblazoned on it with him on his bike and the tight pink pants, and have a good stroll through Eaton Square in front of various colleagues in the newsroom who were cheering the event on with great enthusiasm. That's one of my favorite memories of the Expositor.
Hi, I'm Peter Fitzpatrick. I worked at the Expositor from, I think it was about 87 to 94, and I closed a lot of factories while I was there because I was the business reporter during the recession, so that was fun. My favorite memory, there was this woman there, I can't remember her name, and we had a bet about something, and she had to wear, I think it was blue sweatpants somewhere, and it was just funny. That's my favorite memory of it.
My name is David Stonehouse, and I worked at the Expositor from 1990 to 1994. And it was a very interesting period in my life. I met some wonderful people who were my colleagues and became my friends. And I worked on some pretty interesting stories. Apparently, there was one night when I got horribly drunk and was dragged into the newsroom against my will by some friends and colleagues. I don't remember why. I always wrote really long stories. The longest story I ever wrote was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 inches, and they ran it over 6 or 7 days. It was about a dead prostitute in Vancouver. Yes, the poor girl was from Brantford.
I'm June Callwood, and I worked on the Expositor between February 1941 and September 1942. That's about 18 months. Some give or take a week or two. And that was my school of journalism. I went from there to the Toronto Star and then to the Globe and Mail, and I've been writing ever since. I couldn't have done it without the Expositor.
My name's Dave Schultz, and I worked at the Brantford Expositor from 1976 to 2001, which was way too long. I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Didn't work very hard most of the time. One of the memories I have working at the Expositor is the one summer when the newsroom was moved up to the 3rd floor while they were renovating the main newsroom. And on Saturday mornings, we'd have a skeleton crew that would have to come in, put the paper out, and then kind of do nothing for most of the rest of the shift. So what we resorted to doing was having paper airplane contests. Make paper airplanes, throw them out of the 3rd floor window, and see who could hit the lions across the street. And that's the most important thing that ever happened at the Expositor while I was there.
I'm Jill Atkin. I started at the Expositor December 27th, 1977. I remember it very well. It was the day after Boxing Day because I spent the entire Boxing Day lying on my sister's bed because I was throwing up because I was so nervous I was starting work the next day. It was the worst Christmas I ever had. It was great to work at the Expositor back then. There were a lot more people there at that point because there were all the guys in the composing room and there were all the guys in the press room and there were all the people in the newsroom. There were no cutbacks and no downsizing. Friday nights were a lot of fun because on Friday night there were no departments at the Expositor anymore. There was just Expositor employees who happened to work across the street from the Bell Hotel, which intermittently had strippers or not, so usually there was a large contingent of guys going over and a few of us female types would string along, and after we'd had a good time over there for a few hours, everybody used to pile into my van and then off we'd go to Paris and we'd do the same thing over there. So those were the good old days at the Expositor when it was just one big family and we all had a really great time.
I'm Ed Ecker and I've been retired from the Expositor for 15, 16 years. I retired in 87, so what did that, how's your math? I was there 40 years, started on February the 14th, 1947 as a proofreader. I was a proofreader for 6 weeks. And then one reporter quit, Jack Merriman, and there was an opening for a cub reporter, and that was where I started writing and reporting. Double trip to photography. Not the light little toys that they use now, but big heavy speed graphics with flash bulb. I became a copy editor eventually, and then city editor, and news editor. And finally, my last few years were editorial page editor called the Cedar. It was a hectic times in Brantford, and the 80-hour week was nothing as far as the newsroom was concerned. 6 days a week, if necessary, sometimes even 7.
Hi, my name is Caroline Freibauer. I started working at Expositor March 11th, 1985. I left in 1998. And it was a great time. I started as a farm reporter and then later worked at the Simcoe Bureau for a couple of years. Came in and did some, what did I do after that? Features, did lifestyles after I had my children. And around that time, Susan Gamble's come to be a very close friend of mine, started the paper. She was kind of like my other half. And then finished up, as I said, in 1998. So one of the best things that ever happened to me at the Expositor, other than working for Jim Henderson, who used to greet me every morning with expletives. Expletives, that's it. We won't use those words for posterity, but they were 4-letter words, and he would laugh when I would shriek. So anyway, that was good training. But one of the best things that happened to me at the Expositor is I met my husband, Sam Koliakovo, there, and he really changed my life. So I learned a lot of things about journalism, about the community, and about life there, but the best thing was still meeting my husband and then having 2 wonderful children.
Hi, I'm Rose Simone, and I worked at the Expositor as a reporter from 1976 to about 1978, when I left for the Record in Kitchener. And well, somebody just reminded me that they were always nagging me at the Expositor about not filing my overtime slips, and I never went home, and how I used to work all these hours and never filed my overtime slips, and the union officials were always angry at me for not filing my overtime slips. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like to ask, can I file them now? And still get the money with interest. And anyway, it was a lovely place to work. I enjoyed the people. I really missed it a lot when I left, and it was one of the best papers I've ever worked for.
My name is Margaret Farley, and I worked at the Expositor for about 20 years, I think, and I always had the same job. I was the librarian, and whenever anybody asked me about my work there, I always said, that's the best job I ever had, because I really liked everything that it entailed, and I enjoyed Peter too.
Hi, my name's Don Mawson, and I was a reporter at the Expositor for 15 years, and then for another 15 I was on the desk. And one interesting thing always happens at Christmas. So when we got our free turkeys, Ron Craig had fixed the guys up downstairs who brought them up, and he'd always have a little Cornish hen or something put in my box, so that when I opened it, I had a Cornish hen and everybody else had a turkey.
Hi, I'm Peter DiPodesta. I worked at the Expositor from about 77 to about 95, I think, I don't know. I started in Paris, was a court reporter, business reporter, labor reporter, city hall reporter, deskman, city editor, whole bunch of things. And then I left. Okay, funny story. When I first started there, first day I started there, I was really scared and apprehensive because this was a much larger paper than I'd ever worked at before. And I was just not feeling really comfortable with what they were going to make me do. So I went over to Jimmy Harding, who was the city editor at the time, and poured it in and said, Jim, what do you want me to do? And he says, well, I got some stuff here for you to do. The first big story I covered for the Expositor on my first day of work was rewriting the goat herd show results. And after that, I was never worried again about anything I ever wrote for the Expositor.
Hi, my name is John Zronik. I was the summer student at the Expositor in 2000 and 2001. And if there's one thing I'd like to say about the Expositor is that it was probably the most fun I ever had at a job. And growing up in Brantford, it was really interesting to see how things work inside there because, you know, I mean, I grew up reading the paper, and to actually be a part of it for 8 months was a great privilege. And yeah, a good time, and the people were a lot of fun, and, you know, it was really good. My biggest story was definitely the 52-year-old stripper fired from Moody's Tavern, just a few doors down from the Expositor, for being too old, and filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, you know, trying to get her job back and a little money. And she never did get her job back, and the last I heard of her, she's working in a theme park outside of Montreal called Safari Land, and she has hung up the garter for good now. But that was my biggest story, and everyone was talking about it, not just in Brantford, but you know, all over the country. And it was like my first week on the job, so it was totally exciting, and yeah, it made me want to keep doing this forever.
My name is Wynne Harding, and I worked at the Expositor in 1955. I came in the spring from Sarnia, which was my hometown, because I had answered an ad in the Globe and Mail for a women's editor, and I didn't know where Brantford was or anything about Brantford. When I asked my father about Brantford, he said, Brantford? Oh, they have the biggest Indian reserve in Canada there. That was all he knew. So I came on the train. I didn't have a car. I was like in my early 20s. I arrived here and I was interviewed by Jack Sanders, his name was, Peter Preston, and George Ronald, who was the city editor at the time. And one of the questions I've been told in journalism school that they would ask me would be how to spell accommodation, and I spelled it ACCOMMADIODATION, and they hired me. Jim Harding, who came from Brantford, had the desk next to mine. He was a photographer, reporter, photographer, a two-way man, they called them those days. I don't know if they still do. And he was one of the only single men, I think, in the whole place. There was Ted Beare, who was single, and there was somebody else who was single. And I was dating somebody else, but Jim asked me out. We all went out one night after work. We worked long, long, long hours. We went out one night after work to the Waterford Ponds to go swimming. The whole newsroom went. And then the next day, I think he asked me if I'd like to go on a date with him. My date was out to the reserve for the theater that they have out there every August. So we went out there, we got lost, we couldn't find it, we found it finally, but that was my first date with Jim, who subsequently became my husband. We were married in September of 1956.
Huge winter storm we had in January. I had to stay over. I got here, and then when we got out, the cars were just covered, we couldn't get them, so I stayed with Carol's mother. Anyway, that day Ron's cat had died. The cat was about 20 years old, so he put it in the van or truck. He was going to take it somewhere to dump it, but he couldn't move his truck for 3 days. And then another couple, and that cat was in the van all the time. Unfortunately, it was cold.
You're cold and frozen.
About a week later, he finally disposed of the cat. Nobody wanted to ride with him.
My name is Rick Gamble, and I was a summer student at the Expositor in 1976 and 1977. My greatest memory was the opportunity to do this brilliant, in-depth, investigative piece. They sent me out with a bag of nickels and said, "We want you to go to all the parking meters in downtown Brantford and see if they're giving people their money's worth." And lo and behold, you were getting more time for your coin. That's about as good as it got for me at the Expositor. Otherwise, I was on international villages. Made me what I am today.
My name is Carol Henderson, and I worked at the Expositor in 1958 to 1961, I think. Something like that, 60 or 61. And I worked for Bob Hope, who was the farm editor, and I was his assistant, and I worked in the women's page, and I did features. And I met Jim when I first came there, and we were married in 1960.
Just one more time, I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time, talking about days gone by. I don't know, but I've been told those days we were walking, they were solid gold. Lord, we could carry such a heavy load, walking in days gone by. I don't know if people heard me, but I sure heard some people cry. I don't know if we were worthy, but we sure took some people high. Just one thing, just one more thing, I'd sure love to hear those old guitars ring. I sure want to be amongst the ones who sing, talking about days gone by. 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 If they asked me, they would hear me say, just one time, just one more time. I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time. Talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by. 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 Just one time, just one more time. I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time. Talking about days gone by. I don't know, but I've been told those days we were walking, they were solid gold. And Lord, we could carry such a heavy load, walking in days gone by. I don't know if people heard me, but I sure heard some people cry. I don't know if we were worthy, but we sure took some people high. Just one thing, just one more thing. I'd sure love to hear those old guitars ring. I sure want to be amongst the ones who sing, talking about days gone by. I don't know about tomorrow, I don't even know about today, but I do know that tomorrow, if they asked me, they would hear me say, just one time, just one more time. I'd sure love to see those old friends of mine. I'd sure love to be with them just one more time. Talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by. Talking about days gone by.